I prefer to say that I teach people where the legal boundaries are for the use of force. So if they do have to defend themselves, they're not only well positioned to win the physical fight, which is the most important thing, but they're also well positioned to win the legal fight that happens. You don't want to survive the physical fight only to spend the rest of your life in a cage someplace. You want to be free to live your life with your family and all the things that make life worth living.
Today I have a special guest on the show, our first ever in studio guest. Welcome to the show, Andrew Branca.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
He is the country's leading expert in self-defense law with over 25 years of experience, and you have the YouTube channel, Law of Self-Defense.
I do. More than 30 years of experience. I keep getting older every year.
And you are the author
Of our best-selling book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles, which, by the way, we give away for free at lawofselfdefense.com/free book.
You said something earlier about many people get convicted even though they're innocent or they didn't do
Right.
anything on the books wrong.
Yep.
Why is that?
Well, part of it is just noise in the system. So specifically in this context, we're talking about good guy cases of self-defense, right? Not criminals just making up self-defense, but someone's had to defend themselves against some kind of attack. They don't really know where the legal boundaries are. They may think they know, but in fact, they generally don't know what they're allowed and not allowed to do. And the system itself is not well suited to deal with good guy cases of self-defense. By the system, I mean the criminal justice system.
Right.
When you think of that phrase, criminal justice system, the most controlling word in that three-word phrase is system. It is a system. It's a machine, like a steampunk era machine with giant wheels and gears. It doesn't care about you personally. It doesn't care about fairness. It's just a bureaucratic machine for administering what we call justice, the rules of law to different people. And the second most operative term in that phrase, criminal justice system, is criminal. It's a system that's optimized to deal with criminals. For them, it does a pretty good job. But when you feed a normal law-abiding person into that system, it generally doesn't go very well. And because the system's optimized for dealing with criminals, there's at least always a 10% chance that you'll get convicted if I have to put you in front of a jury. That's what we call the justice part of the criminal
Right.
justice system.
10%, that seems so high.
It's low. Many criminal defense attorneys will tell you it's higher because most criminal defense attorneys, their clients are actually criminals. That's the nature of the business. For someone who has a criminal history who's put in front of a jury, they could be completely innocent of this particular charge. They're looking at more like a 50% chance of conviction.
Wait, say that one more time. So they're
The normal person who's fed into the criminal justice system is a criminal. They have a criminal background. They've done criminal stuff before.
Okay.
They're just back for another ride on the carousel of the criminal justice system. If that person goes in front of a jury, it's more like a 50% chance of getting convicted, even if they're Criminal justice technically system is
Mm-hmm.
innocent of the particular charge this time.
Okay. So who are your typical clients when you defend somebody in a self-defense case?
So most of the cases I work on, the clients tend to be normal law-abiding people, never been in trouble with the law a day in their life. Some of them have never had a speeding ticket in their entire lives, typically between the ages of 35 and 50. Now, I should be clear, I have a consulting practice, so I don't take clients directly. All the cases I work on, somebody used force somewhere in the country, they ended up with a criminal charge. They hire a local attorney to be their lead counsel on their case. My client is their attorney, so I'm consulting to their attorney.
Okay. And what are typical cases that somebody gets into that like winds, like is it a bar fight? Is it a home invasion? Like what is the typical self-defense case?
So the most common criminal charge we're defending against is aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
Okay.
We do murder cases, we do all level of cases, but the most common is aggravated assault with a deadly weapon because what happens is the client was facing something scary, frightening them, and they're carrying a gun, legally carrying a gun, and they pulled a gun out and they pointed it at that person and they said, "Stay back, I'm prepared to defend myself," which sounds like perfect self-defense, right? That same conduct checks all the boxes for a criminal charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. What is assault? It's putting someone else in fear of harm. Well, what are you doing when you're pointing a gun at someone? You're putting them in fear of harm. You're telling them, "I will hurt you if you don't stop doing what's scaring me." It's aggravated because you're threatening them with deadly force harm, and it's with a deadly weapon because you're doing it with a gun. Collectively, in most states, that's good. That's a felony, good for 10 to 20 years in prison. Keep in mind, I'm talking about mothers, fathers, people who've never been in trouble with the law a day in their lives, are now looking at a 20-year felony sentence.
Right. And so have you had any cases where maybe not you or like what are examples of cases that commonly innocent people end up going to prison? Like what's like a common case that might happen?
Well, it can happen in any case. Like I said, there's at least a 10% chance, no matter how innocent you are, that you get convicted. We have a very, very high success rate at law of self-defense. We have almost 100% success in getting charges dismissed or people put into a diversion program. So if they keep their nose clean for a certain period of time, the charges go away. Or if we go to trial, we have a very high rate of acquittals. So we're pretty good at what we do. The cases that really trouble me is the ones where I actually see innocent people being convicted and going to prison. And they tend to be many of the high-profile, politically energized cases out
Right.
there. The George Zimmerman case, the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Now, those two guys happened to get acquitted, but they were at risk of conviction. They would have spent the rest of their lives in jail. Derek Chauvin is another case.
Yeah.
There was reasonable doubt in that case, but he got convicted anyway, and he'll die in prison.
George Zimmerman, can you tell me what the media said about it and what actually happened?
Sure. So the way it was portrayed in the media was that George Zimmerman was a white Latino, a phrase invented for his trial.
A white Latino.
A white Latino. He was some kind of pseudo-white supremacist who saw a 13-year-old black boy walking through his community and decided to kill him and shot him dead for the crime of that boy walking around minding his own business with iced tea and candy. What actually happened was George Zimmerman was a neighborhood watch volunteer for his community that was beset by a tidal wave of home invasions and burglaries and thefts. He saw Trayvon Martin, who was not 13 years old, but was a 17-year-old, well-muscled high school football player.
Wait, he was 17?
17.
Okay, keep going.
Trayvon Martin was a street fighter. In other words, he engaged in fights in the street as entertainment. We know this because we have video of him fighting on his own cell phone. His chosen technique was to punch people in the face, knock them down, and then mount them and beat them into the ground. Well, Trayvon Martin saw that George Zimmerman was on the phone with police reporting a suspicious character, Trayvon Martin. So he ambushed George Zimmerman, punched him in the face, knocked him down, mounted him, was beating him into the ground, smashing his head into a sidewalk. There's eyewitness testimony for all of this. And in the last desperate moment to save his life, George Zimmerman drew his legally carried pistol, fired a single round that killed Trayvon Martin in lawful self-defense.
And then there was all these riots and they made it politically motivated. But somehow Zimmerman still got, he got acquitted, right?
Yeah, when I first looked at the case, I thought, well, surely there must be something from the prosecution here that would suggest guilt, because everything I'm seeing is totally consistent with lawful self-defense. And there simply wasn't anything. But what was happening was it became an opportunity for a local prosecutor who was having difficulty getting reelected in her black community. She had prosecuted a couple of cases involving black people that were very unpopular in the community. She was going to lose her reelection. And then she saw the opportunity with George Zimmerman and said, you know what? If I prosecute this guy for shooting that black high school student, I'll be in favor with the black community again. Now, George Zimmerman was acquitted. So that prosecutor lost that trial if you define winning as getting a conviction. She didn't get a conviction. But if you properly understand what motivated her, it was not to get a conviction. It was to get reelected. And that worked. When she was going to lose reelection, she prosecuted Zimmerman, and she got reelected instead of losing.
So that's how politics get involved in the law, because the prosecutors are elected.
Right.
Right. And so then they have to be political.
That's correct.
So it's got to be heavily dependent on the prosecutor in your area, too.
Right. So, in fact, the prosecutor in George Zimmerman's area, he was pressured to bring charges against George Zimmerman, and he quit. He resigned his job rather than prosecute George Zimmerman. So the prosecutor who ended up taking the case was from a completely different part of Florida, who flew in to take over that case for political advantage.
How can they do that? Because isn't it based on where you are? I don't
Yeah, but once
know.
the original prosecutor quit, it left a vacuum. He needed to be replaced by somebody, and she raised her hand and got picked by the governor.
Oh, so the governor appointed her to go do it?
Essentially assigned her to go into that empty district and take over the prosecutor's role.
And because they made it like a race issue,
Right.
then the facts didn't even matter.
Right. So there's a cliche in the law, and it says, if you're a lawyer and the law is on your side, you argue the law to the jury. And if the facts are on your side, you argue the facts to the jury. And if neither the law nor the facts are on your side, you pound the table. And so that whole prosecution was table pounding. The facts were not on their side. The law was not on their side. It was the cleanest case of self-defense I've ever seen brought to trial. their prospects of actually getting a conviction was shockingly low, probably just that 10% that's noise in the system. So I don't think they really had an expectation of getting a conviction, although it could, of course, happen.
Mhm.
The whole point was for her to win re-election, and in that respect, she won.
Right. And so it's almost like innocent people get like they're like innocent bystanders in the process where innocent people get thrown in jail because politicians are trying to get reelected.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they're just like a twig floating along the river. They're completely helpless.
Oh, and that's why okay. You just made something make sense. That's why they hated Kamala, right? Because I guess she was known for having some unfair prosecutions.
She was really contemptible. First of all, she put a lot of young black men in jail for marijuana crimes at a time when it was becoming clear the social sentiment towards marijuana was becoming more favorable. You didn't need to give these people long sentences. Then she kept them in prison longer than California law required. She could have allowed them to be released earlier, and she wouldn't. Then there were many cases in which they had hidden exculpatory evidence, evidence consistent with innocence on these guys. So they were appealing their cases because the courts had hid that evidence favorable to them, and she argued against getting them released. So she was holding people in prison she knew did not belong in prison.
Well, what would be her motive for doing that?
She thought there was political advantage in it. She wanted to be able to run eventually as someone who was tough on crime.
So, and did you look at any of those cases super in depth? I'm just curious if you think that the cases they bring up were fair or no.
So the ultimate merits of the case are hard to know, right?
Yeah.
Whenever this guy did what he was charged with, I wasn't in the room, so I don't really know in any absolute sense what
Yeah.
happened. But I do know that when the defense is saying, hey, we have exculpatory evidence that's favorable to our client, and the state is arguing for that not to be admitted, that's a problem.
Yeah, because you would think that would be illegal for them not to bring up evidence, right?
At a trial, it would be. It gets a little squishier when we're talking about the appeals process. But if you're a prosecutor and you're genuinely interested in justice and not just
Right.
a score, you seek justice by allowing the evidence in.
Right. Interesting.